Can everyone see my screen at this point?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'll just skip through these ones because we kind of told you who we are. And I acknowledge that I was coming to you from the Liquid territory, and super grateful to be here. I just today actually made a great connection between Indigenous knowledge and science with my students in grade 8, not connected to this Pro-D, but it's always just lovely when we can acknowledge the land and the knowledge that has been here forever. And today my students found out that there really is vitamin C in conifer tea that we brewed from like cedar and spruce and Douglas fir. And so that was pretty cool, and a really neat way of weaving Indigenous ways of knowing with Western science. I think we kind of covered this already about the project. I'm going to take you on a deep dive into the micro mystery, which is from Ocean School, and it is a collection, or within the plastics collection. Heather, you can jump in and correct me if I'm saying the names of things wrong. But in this particular section, we focus on if there is microplastics in sea salt. And the first time I was in a meeting with Heather and she told me about this lab, I was like, there's no way. There's no way that we can find out if there are microplastics in our sea salt in my grade 8 science lab. So I was really excited to try it out, and I will share with you guys what I found and how it's really easy to do this in any situation that you are in. But there's some additional resources here. This is all found on the Ocean School website. It's really easy to navigate and go through. When you click on Micro Mystery, you will be taken to a site where there's a video, there's a student view, you can preview, you can actually pass this out through Google Classroom or PowerPoint or Teams and put it right into your students' folders if you're doing it that way, or you can show the video to the whole class. And I'm just going to play the first couple of minutes of video just so you can see sort of the quality of the content in these resources, because it's really amazing, and it's super well done, super accessible for students. So just show a couple of minutes of that and then pop back into how you actually do this.
It's estimated that 8 million tons of plastic end up in our ocean every year. That's like one garbage truck emptying into the ocean every minute. But of that 8 million tons, much of it is hard to see.
So microplastics are plastics that are smaller than 5 millimeters, about the size of a grain of rice. Some plastics are born that small, right? Exfoliants in hand, sanitizers, that sort of stuff. Those start as microplastics. But most large plastics, once they're in the ocean, which is the strongest thing in the world, they get ground up into smaller and smaller plastics, all the way down to the nanoscale.
Researchers at the University of Toronto use sievins to trap and track trash along the local waterfront.
Here is a piece of microplastic. So you can see all the kind of the little stuff is starting to float up. Here I see a bit of a white pellet, another white pellet. So this is a larger fragment, and eventually it'll break down smaller and smaller. When I first went out into the middle of the ocean and I saw how much plastic was floating around out there, most of it was microplastic. It looked like a soup of confetti floating around on the surface of the water with maybe a buoy and a fishing net and a bottle here and there.
People were thinking, oh, ocean plastics are like plastics on land, but in the ocean. Not true. When they get to the ocean, they are tiny, 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 and they act differently when they are tiny, tiny.
The reality is it's breaking down into these smaller and smaller pieces, which then are available to more and more wildlife because they can literally fit it in their mouth.
A fish eats plastic, and another animal eats that fish. Soon, we have plastic moving through the food chain. So a tiny piece of plastic can become a big problem. So if we're going to stop it, we need to know where that plastic came from in the first place.
So I'll stop the video there, but you can just get a sense of what the quality of the videos are like. The animations are fantastic. I used to draw that exact picture of the fish eating plastic, eating another fish, and drawing that out on my whiteboard. And now I can just pause the video and be like, it's like this, and they don't have to laugh at my drawing skills. So that's something I do like about that. It goes on for 6.5 minutes with some extra great information there as well. And then there's the lab handout. And so that's included in the collection. If you scan that QR code, I believe it takes you right there. But
I know.
Oops.
The link is also in the chat.
There we go. Oh yeah, okay, so Heather's dropped the link in the chat. So when I start this with students, I ask them, like, do you think there's microplastics in our ocean? And they're starting to hear about microplastics a little bit more just through the media, and they know that ocean plastics are a problem. They might have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So they usually say yes, but then this one's really interesting. When you say, well, where could those be coming from? The answers are quite varied, and they don't always know. They often think it's because people leave things on the beach. We do talk a little bit about ghost gear. Sometimes they've never thought that the rubber from your tires could be going off the streets and into the waterways. And my favorite way to engage them is to have them check the labels on the back of their partner's shirt. And then we write down all the different materials their clothing is made up of, and we brainstorm that on the board. And then I ask them if they know what the prefix poly means in all of their poly fibers. And so that's usually a pretty good way to connect them personally with what they're wearing, because a lot of their clothing isn't organic. So it's not cotton or wool. And so that's a really fun way to engage with students on that. And I should mention too, because we're such a small group, if you have any questions about any of this as we go through, just pop on and ask, or you can pop it in the chat. And I think Heather's monitoring that as well. So that's how I engage them into like thinking about where these microplastics could be coming from. And then we use sort of the structure of inquiry with kids. Like, so if plastics are in the ocean and they start to degrade and break down, they could potentially show up in something like sea salt. And this is usually where their eyes get a little bit wide, and they're like, you know, you ask them like, how many of you have sea salt in your home? And most of them do, or most of them have heard of sea salt as something that you can add to food. And typically if you ask them, and we have conversations around this, like, you know, they think that having sea salt is kind of the healthier way to have salt. It's kind of trendy to have sea salt. So it's a pretty easy connection to make with students. And then, you know, asking the question, can we observe microplastics in ocean salt? And let them know that we're going to try. And then I'll show you how we actually go through and collect that data and make those observations. So the experiment itself is quite simple, and they can actually see that when they filter out they dissolve salt in water, and then they can see the actual microfibers in there. So this is my setup. This is how I do it, but I've seen it, like you can see in this previous slide, a little bit differently, just with some really simple coffee filters and red Solo cups. I'm lucky that I have a grade 8 equipped science lab, so I've got some ring stands and clamps and funnels, beakers that I use. And note, I've done this both with lab grade filter paper and coffee filters. They both work, but if you're going to use coffee filters, just double them up because they tear. Not all the salt dissolves, and it gets too heavy for a coffee filter. So if you use coffee filters, just double them up, but the lab grade filters seem like they work pretty well. And I think you can see in the slide there, I use a bunch of different types of salt. We talk about the difference, and it walks you through this in the procedure too, but about where salt can come from. So there's rock salt, there's Himalayan rock salt. We talk about like the salt that's mined from underground. and then ionized and sold commercially. And then we talked a little bit about how they gather and process sea salt. And I like to try and find sea salts from a bunch of different places to test in this experiment. So one's from the Mediterranean and one's from Antarctica that say things like pure and microplastic free. And the Kirkland brand from Costco, and our local Vancouver Island salt. So I'd like to try and have a variety of salts for them to try, along with the rock salt. And then we filter it through the filter paper. So it's just a simple dissolving lab. And once it goes through the filter paper, you pull the filter paper up and you put it on a watch glass and stick it under the microscope. We just use a dissecting scope. It doesn't need to be a compound light microscope. A dissecting scope works well. And I have yet to do this and not find any plastic fibers. So on the handout that comes with the collection in Ocean School, it has a little guide of the different types of microplastics you might find. So things like fragments, which is on the upper right-hand side. But most of what we find, from my experience anyways, are fibers. So little filaments of fiber. And so then we brainstorm and we talk about where these possibly could be coming from, which is when I help them make the connection that when they're doing their laundry, their polyfibers are shedding into their water systems, and those water systems eventually find their way down to the ocean. But we also talk about how fishing gear and lines, especially as they break down in the ocean, can cause those little filaments. And I had one of my favorite moments doing this lab with students is I had a student who was super shocked to find the filaments, and he had been using the salt that said Antarctic pure sea salt, guaranteed microplastic free. And so he right then and there got out his phone and he sent an email off to the company with the picture of what he'd found in their sea salt. We'd never heard anything back, but I thought it was pretty great action, like, or advocacy in action, then right then and there being like, this is what we found in your sea salt. And we talk about the fact, like, is it possible to find ocean water that doesn't have some plastic in it now, and then consequently the sea salts from it. So yeah, some other tips. Just gonna flip through, make sure I already told you about the coffee filter one.
I put the tip sheet. I think most of you are in the tip sheet, but I did put it in the chat. This is a tip sheet that 2 other of our teachers made up, having done the lab a few times. So yeah, we'll continue to add to it as teachers tell us more of their tips. But this is so it'll be a living document for you.
Yeah, and of course, like, warmer water helps the salt dissolve faster. But not so hot that kids are like risking burning themselves while they're doing the lab. Go ahead, Heather, other things?
Yeah, Julio was just asking what kind of microscopes can be used. Are there cheaper, affordable options? I'll just jump in here quickly. We actually tried out the cheapest option, which they're called foldoscopes. They're not ideal for this project, but they are super cool. But Kim, I'll let you jump in on what kind of microscopes you would suggest.
Yeah, so I typically use a binocular dissecting scope with only about a 4 times magnification. It's definitely possible to use like a 5 times like ocular loop microscope, like a little handheld one, and see these as well. Once students know what they're looking for, they can often look at the filter paper and know that there is plastic there, just because those the fibers in particular are often colored. But so a magnifying glass or a loop would work, or there's the little handheld microscopes. Can't remember who sells them, but they're just like a little, I think maybe a 10 time, like almost just like the ocular part of a compound like microscope. They're just handheld, and those would work really well in it as well. So definitely some options that can be nice and simple for that.
Julio, sorry, I was going to say what we could do is in the tip sheet we could add some affordable microscope options. So that might be helpful for everybody.
And if your lab, or wherever you're at, if you have like even a singular compound light microscope, it could work as well. It would just be a little bit more finicky because you'll have to put it on a slide, and it just wouldn't be quite as quick and easy, but you could do this with a compound light microscope as well. Yeah, and then working through some inquiry, right, questions about like how does the microplastic get into our local waterways? And this could lead into one of the other things that Ocean School has, which is a microplastic collection device to sample your local waterway, and that's baby legs, and that's in the plastic collection as well. So another use of
next week's session.
the next session, yeah. There's this one, how did microplastic become a problem? And this part of the collection will take you into the history of plastic. And then does microplastic make its way into fish? And that is an interactive in the plastics collection as well, discovering the plastic cycle. So all really cool links within Ocean School that you could explore with students, either by making some sort of collection device, or assigning the next pieces of the collection for students to do on their own. One little plug for Ocean School: if you are a teacher and you need a sub, sometimes I've left Ocean School things for the sub to do because they are that straightforward. And so I've sometimes said, we'll have students go onto their teams and open up the Ocean School lesson that I've shared with them, and then they can just work through that on their own. I'm not in a school that's rich in technology, so I don't always have a one-to-one situation for my kiddos, but when it happens, it can be really a really great learning tool as well. And then I was fortunate enough to extend this even further earlier this spring, where I went out on a boat with my students, and we did a plankton tow for phytoplankton. And we were wondering, our question was, will we find microplastics in our plankton tow? So we found lots of plankton, which was great, but when we put it under the microscope, we also found fibers. So you can see in these pictures with our copepods and with the radiolarians and diatoms in there and the little krill, we have the green fibers and red fibers and black fibers and blue fibers. So we definitely found microplastic in our plankton tow. And then it's always nice when kids get information like this to feel empowered to make some sort of change. And so Ocean School has this cool Take Action toolkit, and students can go in here and they can pick a project. For my expo or my elective course, I get students to do some sort of accumulating project, and they have a choice of doing any of these things. And we use the Ocean School site sort of as their inspiration. Oops, I just overshared. Oh, I linked to the site. I guess we can show the site because I accidentally clicked. This is what it looks like if you hit shoreline cleanup. It looks like that. And then it's actually kind of cool. You can see there's the step-by-step about how you would register to be part of the shoreline cleanup, upload your data from the shoreline cleanup. This is something I do with students. We're actually doing this tomorrow with my class. We're going to go down to the beach and do a cleanup. And we always upload our data so that we're tracking what we clean up. And it's a good way to keep kids engaged when they're outdoors too, with the tracking of the data, because sometimes they like to get silly, especially at this time of year. But you can just see this is the format of how the Ocean School slides look. They're really straightforward, really clear, easy to follow along with. And this whole Take Action toolkit has things like this for each of their ideas for taking action. And I'm not sure how to actually exit out of here. So that's exciting. But I think that was almost it anyway. But we were going to go back to the back slide. I might have to stop sharing and
okay.
try. Just a second. stop.
Why don't we stop sharing and open it up just because there's only a couple minutes left, and why don't we open it up for questions? Does anyone have any questions for Kim?
I do. I understand the sea salt, but I also do like volunteer water monitoring in like the streams and lakes. And will I find microplastics in my local water sources too?
You
Like,
should definitely check.
I can definitely check. And so,
Yeah, I would.
That's it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you come to the next two sessions, so the next one is about is creating a DIY data collection device
Okay.
for finding plastic in waterways.
okay.
And then the last session is like really about like simple ways that you can monitor water quality with your students, which it sounds like you're already doing.
Yeah.
It might be interesting to have your voice there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was like, you kind of think that it might be there, but then when like I actually started looking for it, like in those plankton toes, and now even when we go to the beach, I bring like I have a little mini plankton net, and we find plastics everywhere. So I would,
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty ubiquitous at this point. Any other questions, or even just like things like how to do the lab, or any barriers that you think you might have equipment wise that I could maybe help you troubleshoot?
I had a quick question. It's great that it sounds like salt is one of the easiest things to use. Is there any other food sources though that do have high microplastics, either just to like inform students or also that the experiment could be possibly done with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have yet to actually do this successfully. The one other place I've looked but haven't found or haven't looked close enough because I ran out of time to get the microscopes out. I also do a squid dissection with my students. And I have heard from other educators that when you find the stomach and if you extract and look under the microscope at the contents of the squid stomach, that you might be able to find microplastics in there. And I would imagine maybe also that like if you had access to a full fish, you know, like a where from whatever waterway you're close to, examining stomach contents under a microscope, you might be able to find them there. You might be able to go to a fish market and ask for some of the guts or the stomach. But yeah, I haven't actually. I've tried in the squid dissections, but it's always a little bit of a management thing. So to pull out the microscopes on top of dissecting squid, I haven't quite got there yet.
I've got a helper now.
What age range do you usually do this with?
So I usually do it with grade 8, so they're 14. But I think that with like the scaffolding and making it like having all your materials laid out, like even with my grade 8s, like I have like my whole setup just like very locked in with them. I don't get them to do much of that setup piece thinking on their own. But I could do this with grade 4s, grade 5s, like anything sort of intermediate and up. And I know that other teachers with Ocean School use it in their secondary classrooms, like grade 11, grade 12 as well. So I would say that their age range for sure would be grade 4 to 12. But if you were looking for even younger kids, like primary, you could always do it as a demo and then have it. Maybe you could find a microscope that connects to your computer screen as a projector, and you could project what you were finding. And so you just do one experiment and do it as a demo for your whole class. And you could still do the whole process of inquiry at a primary level.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know we're a couple minutes over time here.
Yeah.
Heather, I'm going to jump in, and do you want me to pull the screen back up so they can see the link again to the project? Or
That's okay. I can. I'm just going to talk through it, and then we can put the link in the chat. So the next step. So if you want to commit to taking action with us and with Ocean School and having support, we have another Google form for you to fill out. Filling it out means that you're committing to taking action during the 2024-2025 school year. We are going to, as much as possible, we are going to try to provide equipment for like the size of a class to participate in this project. We will have an optional Kickstart meeting in September. I know September is a hard time. We'll probably do it like end of September. And then you will have ongoing support. So if you decide to do this project with your class, you'll be able to reach out to Kim and say, hey, we didn't find anything, or I can't find a microscope that is working, or whatever your question is, or we found all these microplastic. I need some ideas for what to do with this data. Like, how can I share it? What can we do next? So Kim could offer some support to do that. Sound good? I'm going to drop the link. If you're planning to come to some other sessions, you're not sure which project you want to do, don't fill out the form yet. So if you're planning on coming next week or the week after, hold off on filling out the form, because you're gonna have to select the project that you want to receive equipment. It doesn't stop you from doing the other projects. Please do them if you want to, but we can't provide multiple sets of equipment for everybody. Sound good?
Yeah, feel free. I think my email is Heather shared the slide deck, I think. Did you share the slide deck?
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna share it. Right.
Contact information is there if you want to reach out with any questions. I'm here, and I've run this one a few times now, so I have. And
she's an expert. Yeah. We do know this lab works. Like, we've taken it to conferences. We've done, many classes have done it, so we know you're going to find microplastic with your students. So I hope you guys all have a really wonderful evening. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we will send a follow-up email with all the links. I know there's been a lot of links in the chat. But thank you guys very much for coming. Nice to see you, Jay. Bye, everyone.